What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode in the Ask Me Anything series. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. It's pretty crazy that we are already in the closing stretch of the regular season. Only 5 weeks to go until the playoffs begin on April 22nd. I feel like once the trade deadline passes, the rest of the regular season seems to just fly by every single year. As always, before we get started, I do want to give a huge shout out and say thank you to every single one of you that took the time to come up with a question and leave it on the post, whether you sent the question in on Twitter or left it under the community tab post here on YouTube. Just know I read every single one and I appreciate all of you guys. If you enjoy these Ask Me Anything videos and you want to see another episode next Monday, then be sure to leave a like on this video. That is the best way to let me know that you enjoyed. Let's see if we can hit 700 likes on this episode. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start the episode off with the first question from Josh Name, who says, what playoff series would you want to see the most? And also really appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad you enjoy the videos. If we're just talking matchups that look like they could potentially happen in the first round, I think whatever the 2-3 matchup is going to be in the Central Division is going to be an insane series, whether it's Dallas versus Colorado, Dallas versus Winnipeg, Colorado versus Winnipeg. Whatever that 2-3 matchup ends up being, a very good team is going to be going home in round one. Those three teams have really been neck and neck all season long, and things have just gotten closer as the regular season winds down. All three of those teams that I just mentioned that are in the top three spots in the Central right now are tied with 91 points. Another playoff series I'd really like to see, whether it's in the first round, second round, or conference finals, is Tampa Bay versus Florida. I remember their playoff series back in 2021 was an absolute banger. Tampa ended up winning that in 6 games. They then matched up again the following season in the 2022 playoffs, but it was kind of a disappointing series because Florida really just didn't show up. Tampa Bay kind of ran their show, swept them 4-0. They obviously didn't end up meeting in the playoffs last season during Florida's run to the Stanley Cup Finals, so I think everybody is ready to see that playoff series again. The next question we have comes from Griffiths, who says, if you were commissioner / Gary for a day, what would be the one big thing or few small things you would change or introduce, rules, expansion, etc.? And also really appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad you enjoy the videos. The one thing I would change first above all is change the playoff format back to 1 versus 8. I always just liked that better. I think it makes more sense. I just talked about how one of Winnipeg, Dallas, or Colorado is going to be going home in the first round this season. I don't think that should be the case. I don't think those teams should have to play in round 1. If you look at the Western Conference standings, those 3 teams currently rank 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in the entire conference. So that's probably the first thing I would change. I just feel like the 1 versus 8 format definitely does a better job of rewarding teams for finishing with a high seed during the regular season, more so than the current format does. I definitely wouldn't mind if the NHL experimented with a new point system. I really like the PWHL point system: 3 points for a regulation win, 2 points for an overtime or shootout win, 1 point for an overtime or shootout loss, and of course 0 points for a regulation loss. So that's something I would consider. Another thing that the PWHL is doing that I actually really like is their draft lottery format. It's called the Gold Plan, and it will assign the first pick to the non-playoff team that acquires the most points following its elimination from playoff contention. Once a team is mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, it begins earning draft order points. The team with the most draft order points at the conclusion of the regular season will earn the first overall pick. So basically, when you're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, you want to win as many games as possible to earn the first overall draft pick. I think this is a fantastic way to keep games involving teams that are already mathematically eliminated from the playoffs interesting and worth watching down the stretch and towards the end of a regular season. Like, could you imagine on the last day of the regular season, you have 2 non-playoff teams who are neck and neck in terms of the race for the first overall draft pick, and they play on the final day of the regular season and the winner gets the first overall draft pick? That would be insane. And with this format, there's a possibility something like that could happen. And the last thing that I'll mention that I would consider doing if I was commissioner of the NHL is implement a play-in tournament. I think the NBA has done it perfectly. If the NHL were to implement something like this, I think they should completely just copy and paste what the NBA is doing, where basically you have the 7 to 10 seeds competing for the 7th and 8th seed at the end of the regular season. Obviously, the teams that finish the regular season in the 7th and 8th seed have the advantage in this play-in tournament. They only have to win 1 game, as opposed to the teams in the 9th and 10th seeds, they have to win 2 games. It just adds a whole other element to the end of the regular season. And listen, we all know the NHL is about making money, and having a mini tournament of games before the playoffs begin, which consists of games that are basically playoff games, would make the NHL more money. It's more ticket sales, it gets markets and teams involved in the fight for the playoffs that otherwise wouldn't be involved. I also think it's something that would make a lot less teams, tank and kind of blow up their team at the trade deadline. Say if a team's, in the 9th or 10th seed around the deadline as opposed to to selling, maybe they decide to, be buyers or hold on to their players that they otherwise would trade because they know they have that chance of getting into the playoffs despite the fact that they're a 9th or 10th seed. So those are a handful of things that I would consider implementing, or at least, try experimenting with if I was commissioner of the NHL. Sorry I rambled on for a long time there, but really interesting question, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' answer to this. What are some things you would change about the NHL if you were commissioner? Let me know down below in the comments. The next question we have comes from Scarecrow, who says, is Peterka one of the most improved players this season? Greetings from Germany, and also really appreciate the kind words, and I always love hearing where you guys are watching the videos from. And now that I'm reading this question, that's maybe another thing that I would change if I was commissioner of the NHL, is implement a most improved player award. And if that award was a thing, then I do think somebody like JJ Peterka would be a player you have to give some consideration to. He has taken his game to a whole other level this season. He's already almost doubled his goal total from last season in just 68 games. He's set a new career high in points by 8. He's probably going to finish the season pushing that 50-point mark. Peterka has turned into a legit top 6 forward this season for the Buffalo Sabres, and at just 22 years old, he's only going to continue to get better. Some other names that I think would be in contention for this award if it were a thing: Quentin Byfield, he's taken a massive step this season for the Kings. A couple of young players on Dallas I think would make good candidates: Thomas Harley and Wyatt Johnston. He's a little bit older than all the players I've mentioned so far, but I think his name has to be at least brought up, and that is Frank Vatrano of the Anaheim Ducks, who's having a career year. Connor Ingram, goaltender for the Coyotes. Dakota Joshua, been a very impactful bottom 6 forward for Vancouver. I could go on and on, really. There are a ton of players that have improved drastically this season, but those are just some ones off the top of my head that I think would be in the conversation for a most improved player award. The next question we have comes from Jonah Craft 7, who says, who is the best waiver claim of all time? This is a really interesting question. I think I've actually made a video on this topic before. That was a long time ago though, so I'm sure most of you watching this have never seen that video. I'm going to bring up 2 names here. My close second would be Ilya Bryzgalov, but in my opinion, the best waiver claim of all time has to be Steve Sullivan. The Blackhawks picked him up off of waivers in 1999, and he went on to have 4 consecutive 20-plus goal, 60-plus point seasons with the Blackhawks. There's obviously been so many waiver claims that have went on to be, impactful pieces for the team that claimed them, but Steve Sullivan was a legit star for the Blackhawks for a handful of seasons. They ended up trading Sullivan to the Nashville Predators at the deadline in 2004 and ended up landing 2 second-round draft picks for Steve Sullivan. So from this one waiver claim, the Blackhawks ended up getting 4.5 very strong seasons of Steve Sullivan being a very productive top 6 player for them, and then when they decided to move on from him, they were able to land 2 second-round draft picks. They got unbelievable value there. There is a handful of players that are in the NHL right now that I think, have the potential to maybe go down as some of the best waiver claims of all time. Gustav Forsling of the Florida Panthers, who signed a new 8-year extension with Florida not that long ago. If he can continue to play throughout the majority of this 8-year deal like he's played over the last couple of seasons, he's definitely going to be a guy people bring up as one of the best waiver claims ever. Sam Montembeault has turned into a very strong goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens, and they locked him up through the 2026-27 season, so if he can continue to be a solid starter for them, that's a name I think you're going to hear when this conversation is brought up. The next question we have comes from Braden Martins, who says, how important is plus minus to you? Gustav Forsling has been dominating that stat for the past couple of years, yet I never see anyone mention his name or even give him some credit for how well the Panthers are doing. Would love to hear your thoughts on that stat line, and also really appreciate the kind words. I'm glad you enjoy these style of videos. They're probably my favorite kinds of videos to make. Plus minus has become a very controversial stat. I feel like there's a lot of people that don't care about plus minus in the slightest and don't think it matters whatsoever, and then there's some people that think it's the end all be all, and if they see a player as, a minus, that automatically means they're a bad defensive player. It's a stat that I think you always just have to take with a grain of salt. Like, you could have a player that's out there having an absolutely dominant shift, out-chancing the opposition, having them hemmed in their own end, and then, they could get lucky and go the other way and score a soft one before that player gets off the ice, and all of a sudden they're a -1. That's why I like expected goals for percentage a little bit more than plus minus. I think it, tells more of the story. I seen somebody comment on one of my videos recently that Bedard shouldn't win the Calder because he's a -37, and I kind of find that funny. Like, this is an 18-year-old forward playing, the most minutes of any forward on his team on a brutal Blackhawks team, and he's having one of the best offensive seasons by an 18-year-old world in NHL history, and yet there's some people that want to discredit that because of his plus minus. I think that's ridiculous. I honestly feel like the jaw injury that Bedard went down with in the time that he missed actually helped his Calder Trophy case in a sense, because if you watch the Blackhawks and any of the games they played without Bedard, the offense is just non-existent. The difference of when Bedard isn't playing to when he is playing is night and day, and again, I don't think he should be discredited just because, his plus minus doesn't look great. The next question we have comes from Delta, who says, what one player not currently on the Detroit Red Wings would you like to see lift the Stanley Cup for the first time? I think I'd honestly have to go with Joe Pavelski of the Dallas Stars. In my opinion, he is one of the biggest draft steals in NHL history. He was a 7th round draft pick by the Sharks back in 2003. He's been one of the most consistent players in the NHL for like 2 decades now. He's currently 39 and is still such a fantastic player and a very important piece for Dallas. He's came close a couple of times. He made the Stanley Cup Finals once with the Sharks and once with the Stars. He's never been able to win it. So before he retires, I'd love to see him get that Stanley Cup and cap off what has been an unbelievable career. The next question we have comes from 4U2NV Hockey, who says, where does the name Oquist originate from? I don't know if you've ever actually publicly said it on your channel, but let me know if you have. I have definitely answered this question in the past on recent Ask Me Anythings, but I don't think I've answered it in like over a year. So there's probably a lot of people that, didn't see that video, and there's a lot of new subscribers and everything like that. There's no real crazy story behind it. Growing up, I was always, watching live streams on Twitch, and one of my favorite streamers was something, and I can't remember for the life of me. Like, this was a long time ago. I don't even know if this person streams anymore, but that's where the inspiration for the O part of the name comes from. And when I made this channel in, I think, like 2016, Gustav Nyquist was one of the better young up-and-coming players in the Red Wings organization, so that's where the name originates from. Moving along now to some questions from Twitter. This one comes from Lick Nidstrom, who says, do you think the Wings will be very active in the offseason through trades/free agency? I think that this team is still one top 6 scoring threat away from being a legit playoff team. If so, is that the piece you could see them adding? Honestly, I don't think the Red Wings are going to make a big splash in the offseason. I think a lot of what could improve the team is addition by subtraction. There's some guys that I think are definitely going to be buyout candidates like Justin Hall, Andrew Kopp. You have 2 of your franchise cornerstones in Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider, who are both RFAs, and they're going to need extensions. There is some UFAs that I think Yzerman would like to bring back as well. Patrick Kane, Daniel Sprong, Gostisbehere. So to be honest, I'm not really expecting all that crazy of an offseason from Steve Yzerman. You want to leave room for these young players, down in Grand Rapids, who are kind of knocking on the door already and are expected to have an impact on the Red Wings as soon as next season. Players like Marco Kasper, Simon Edvinsson, Berggren, Albert Johansson. Carter Mazur is another guy that I don't think is all that much of a long shot to make the roster next season. And then you have wild cards like Nate Danielson and Axel Sandin Pellikka. So there's a lot of young guys that are going to be trying to crack this roster next season. Obviously, all those players I just mentioned aren't going to make the team at once, but I hope there's at least enough room for a couple of these guys to grab roster spots. And in order for that to happen, I think the Red Wings need to part ways with some veterans, especially on the back end, because the blue line is really crowded, and Gostisbehere is the only guy currently a pending UFA. Moving along now, this next question comes from Kane's Updates, who says, is the skepticism around the Kuznetsov trade somewhat or mostly gone? I know it's a small sample size, but he has been very effective in his short time in Carolina so far. I think Kuznetsov has definitely already silenced a lot of doubters in the 6 games he's played with Carolina. He has been very effective, like you said. Kuznetsov looks the best he's looked in quite some time. I think the people that were, skeptical about this move had a right to be. I was one of those people, just didn't really know what to expect. His game had really fallen off a cliff over the last couple of seasons. He, of course, went into the player assistance program. So I think a lot of the skepticism just came from, people not really knowing what to expect. It is very clear, though, that Kuznetsov needed a change of scenery, and this move has benefited him greatly. He looks, re-energized. In the later years of his career with the Capitals, he clearly had some things going on off the ice that I don't want to speculate on, but you have to imagine, when you're dealing with off-ice issues, it's very difficult to, completely lock in and focus on just playing hockey and to be completely engaged. Hopefully everything's cleared up for Kuznetsov and he's just ready to focus on playing hockey. It seems like that's the case. The early returns on this move are looking pretty good for Carolina, and it's a trade that could turn out to be a steal for them if Kuznetsov keeps this up. It's a guy who obviously has a ton of skill. It's not like he just completely forgot how to play over these last few seasons. He's only 31. You got to imagine the Hurricanes organization and Hurricanes fans are very encouraged by his play. And now finally finishing out the video with a non-hockey related question here. This one comes from Jay Conroy05, who says, what is your favorite movie? And also really appreciate the kind words. I'm glad you enjoy the videos. My number one answer to this question is always going to be Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. I am a Star Wars nerd. I grew up watching the prequels, so that movie just always has, a place in my heart, and it's probably my favorite movie of all time. Aside from Star Wars, I think the first Karate Kid movie would probably have to be my answer. Also love Paul Blart Mall Cop, the first one. Didn't like the second one, but the first one I think is one of the funniest movies of all time. I love Kevin James, so those would probably be, 3 of my favorite movies ever. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I want to give a huge thank you again to every single one of you that took the time to come up with a question and either send it in on Twitter or leave it on the community tab post. Even the questions that don't get featured in the video, just know I do read them all and I appreciate all of you guys. If you enjoy this series and you want another episode next Monday, then be sure to leave a like on this video. That is definitely the best way to let me know that you enjoyed. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want NHL content just like this all year round, hit that subscribe button and I will talk to you all again soon.